What's going on, guys? It's Curse with Curse Bank Catfishing, and I want to thank you for actually tuning in to the very first episode ever of the Curse Bank Catfishing podcast. We're going to call this Shop Talk or something along those lines because there is a video format and there's also the podcast format that some of you may be listening to, or some of you may be watching this on YouTube. Either way, just know that I really appreciate your support. I appreciate you stopping by. So the very first episode of this Shop Talk podcast, whatever you want to refer to it as, we're actually going to talk about why catfishing. Alright, so I make no bones about it. I catfish over anything else. But I do bass fish, I crappie fish, crappie, however you pronounce it depending on your neck of the woods and where you're from. And I do bass fish from time to time. But we're going to take a minute to actually talk about why I personally enjoy it, that is. And so with that being said, we're going to go ahead and dive into this. So the very first thing is there's just something about reeling in a massive fish. And I'm not talking about like a 10-pound channel cat. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking like 30 plus up to the hundreds depending on where you're at. There's something about that fight, that hit, that takedown, just all of it. If you haven't ever experienced it, you just need to try it one time. If you try it one time, I promise you'll be hooked forever after that. However, I do understand that it's not everybody's cup of tea, because catfishing, you know, it can be messy, especially when we talk about bait. The vast majority of catfishermen, we use live bait or cut bait. And depending on how squeamish you are, you might not be up to that task. But if you are, I strongly encourage you to give it a shot. The other thing is there's so many different ways that you can catfish. You can fish from a bank, you can fish from a boat, from a kayak, you can fish from a lock wall and a dam, and there's just so many options for you to actually go and chase these catfish. So let's talk about those setups really quick. If you're going to fish from the bank, you can do one of two things. You can either purchase a really good quality rod holder, such as takedown rod holders or smackdown rod holders, or whoever you prefer. I'm not affiliated with either company, so my opinion is completely open. Or you can do the old faithful trick where you balance a bunch of rocks on your very expensive rod and you hope that it doesn't get pulled out. Personally, I prefer the takedown rod holders, and that's just my personal preference. They have multiple positions. They're easy. I take a rubber mallet and I drive them into the ground, and I've never had one pull out on me. In addition to your rod holder, obviously you gotta look at where you're going to fish. Are you going to target flathead? Are you going to target channel cat? Or are you going to target blue cats? Depending on what you're going to target is going to determine where you're going to want to set yourself up at. So here's an example. When I started catfishing when I was like 12 years old. And that's my earliest memory of it, at least. And so 12 years old, I would grab whatever rod I had and I would fish with chicken liver. And this is before I knew circle hooks were a thing, so yes, bear with me on that. I would use chicken liver and I would just hold my rod in my hand. I would sit there wherever I was fishing and wait for a channel cat to bite. Channel cats are everywhere. On top of that, the fact that they're everywhere, it's also the fact that they're really easy to catch. They eat anything. But chicken liver is hands down my go-to bait. If I'm just trying to catch a bunch of little channel cats, I know that I can catch them on chicken liver. As well as I might end up catching a carp or two as well. Versus like if you were going to target a flathead, you're going to want to find a spot that you know has some kind of structure in it. And when I say structure, I'm talking about a tree or a big brush pile that's submerged under the water, or you're going to want to find where the flatheads are going to come out of that structure to pursue their bait fish. So bluegill, shad, whatever they're going to eat, you want to make sure that you're targeting them either where they live or where they're going to go. Let's look at this for an example. Here in the Kanawha River in West Virginia, I know flathead will eat almost anything that is moving and or alive. They'll eat cut bait too, but the moving part of it, that's what really draws them in. I don't know why, it's just their nature. A prime example, and I'll be honest, still to this day, I have a hard time believing it. There is a local bank tournament here in West Virginia called West Virginia Bank Monsters. It's ran by a buddy of mine named Dakota Kirk, and last year another buddy of mine, Brandon Somerville, placed second in the fish off. And the biggest flathead he caught that night, he told me that he caught it on a minnow. I'm going to say that again. He caught it on a minnow. First of all, I called BS straight out of the gate, just saying. I found it really hard to believe. But my buddy Brandon has absolutely nothing to gain to me by lying, because I was the one that provided him with the bait that he was using for that tournament. I already know that they'll strike moon eye, they'll strike almost any cut bait, but to hear that it was caught on a minnow was unbelievable. And I'll see if I can find a picture of it, and if I can, if you're watching this on YouTube, I'll attach that picture right here. Back on the topic of conversation, sorry I went on a little rant there about the bank tournaments, but I did want to share that story with you. If you were targeting blue catfish, so if you're targeting blues, you're going to want to find current. Blues love current. For me, I personally have never caught a blue from the bank. That's just my bad luck, you know, I guess that's just the way it is. I've had no issues catching flatheads from the bank. But I have seen, again, my buddy Kirk, he pulled in relatively recently a massive blue cat from the bank. And again, I'll put a clip of that somewhere here in the video, make sure that you guys can see it. But you want to target current, you want to look for deep holes, and that's typically where you're going to find your blues. Now keep in mind too, something that plays a role in all of this, flathead, blue, channel cat, is your temperature and your weather conditions and the time of year. So if you're in the winter, and I've said this before, it is next to impossible to catch big catfish from the bank unless you know 100% there is a hole that they are parked in. It is next to impossible. In fact, during the winter I almost never catfish because of this. That was before I had a boat. But from the bank, it's really hard to do. I don't recommend it, but don't get me wrong, I've been in that person's shoes. I just wanted to go fishing, I wanted to try, you know, you miss every shot you don't take. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's very unlikely. Now, in addition to targeting your desired species, you also need to be aware of what we were discussing earlier, is the bait. When you're fishing from the bank, especially, we're going to use the bank tournaments as a prime example here. So the West Virginia Bank Monsters tournament runs off of length. They carry around a bump board and they measure the length of the catfish that they catch. There is a minimum that it has to be, I'm pretty sure it was 16 inches was the minimum that you could put in. But it's the total length throughout the night. That being said, so you may have some people that are going to target larger fish, but you will have other guys that will target specifically channel cats and try to catch a mess of channel cats to come up with a huge number by the end of the tournament. And they can win a tournament by doing that. So that's when your bait options become a thing. Most guys that I know that fish those tournaments, they'll target 4 rods will target a big fish, 4 rods will target a little fish. When I say the little fish, I'm obviously referring to channel cats. Channel cats aren't known for getting massive or even relatively big, at least here in my neck of the woods for that matter. In fact, the vast majority, I think the biggest one I've ever caught out of the Kanawha River was a 10-pound channel, and that's saying something. However, so bait options for that, obviously if you're going to go for the bigger fish, you're going to want cut bait, you're going to run bigger hooks, and you're going to want something that's fresh. So you're going to want a bait fish that has come out of that body of water. Versus the channel cats. The channel cats, you can do what I said before. You can still use small bait fish chunks. They'll strike it every time. Channel cats literally eat everything. And that's what's kind of unique about them in those tournaments, is a channel cat can be what makes or breaks the winner of one of those tournaments. So if you wanted to, you could go buy the chicken liver. You could buy some form of a shrimp or some kind of a fish type thing. I don't know how else to word it. I've never ran shrimp because I try to fish with either something that's really bloody or something that is native to the body of water, regardless of what species I am chasing. But, so you can go and you can buy a $2 thing of chicken liver and catch 13, 14 channel cats in a night that are all over 16 inches, and you'll come out with a pretty decent number. Versus the guy who is going to go out and target the big fish. Now, if he catches 2 or 3 big fish, he's probably got you beat. But it's a lot harder for some of these guys to target those big fish because they just haven't had the time to put into researching where they can catch them from the bank at. Whereas some of these guys may fish a private dock, or they may know exactly where they need to fish from. We've talked a lot about the tournaments and everything else, but here's the thing, guys, in reality, why catfishing is so important to me. There is a level of peace that I achieve when I am either sitting in my kayak, sitting on a boat, or sitting in that bank, just mindlessly watching these rods behind me. You can't see them if you're listening to the podcast version, but I have nothing but a bunch of Mad Cat rods behind me. There is just something so peaceful about it. And then there's something crazy about when it goes from absolutely nothing happening to the chaos just opening up. And rods going down left and right, huge takedowns, little bites, little bits of excitement here and there. It really just, you gotta experience it for yourself. And for me personally, I love catching these blue cats, love it. But there is nothing like watching that flathead takedown. Those of you who don't know, so the flathead takedown is easy to identify. A flathead takedown will typically tap the line once or twice, and then you'll just see this slow, steady pull. That is the telltale sign of a flathead. Blues, when they hit, it's just wham, done. Channel cats, you'll see them tap around because they're munching on a bait that's probably too big for them to try to eat, but they're going to try to eat it anyway. And eventually they will get it, or they'll mush it down to where they can just rip it off of the hook. But a lot of people look at catfishing as a lazy sport because, oh, we're just running with lines in the water. Well, you're not thinking about it the way that we do. Yes, we aren't jigging, we aren't moving, unless you're bumping, you can bump. And that's the other part. I think a lot of people don't understand how many different ways there are to actually catfish, especially if you're on a boat. Yes, you can anchor up just like you would be on the bank, and you can sit somewhere and target these fish. Or you can drag, you can suspend drift, you can bump. There's so many different ways to actually do this that there is no one size fits all. And I'm sure that even if the most hardy bass fisherman just gave one of them a shot, especially bumping, I think bass fishermen would enjoy bumping quite a bit. Instead of, you know, all of us taking shots at each other, which I'm over exaggerating. It's really not that bad, guys. There's no need to get into arguments or be silly over anything. But regardless, there are so many different ways that you can catfish, and there's a size and a fit out there for everybody. You just got to figure out what you like and what you prefer. Because I'll be honest with you, my boy Matt down in North Carolina fishes Lake Norman all the time. Before me and him started fishing together, so Matt anchored up everywhere. And then I showed Matt how to drag, and that's all he does now. He loves dragging. He loves pulling boards, and he loves dragging. Whereas me here in the canal, especially out of my kayak, I love to suspend fish. I love just floating down river, letting the current take me, and then all of a sudden you just feel the thump. And that's the thing about the kayak catfishing thing. There is something completely different about it that neither the bank fisherman nor the boat fisherman will ever understand. You just have to give it a shot. But guys, so where we're just getting this started, I'm gonna try to keep these episodes down to around 10-15 minutes, somewhere around that. As we get better at it, the episodes will become longer. But I hope that you guys have enjoyed this first episode, and just make sure that if you haven't already, if you're watching this on YouTube, like and subscribe. If you're listening to it on a podcast platform, make sure that you like and subscribe there too. And don't forget, you can find me on YouTube, TikTok, almost any social media platform. Just look up Cursed Bank Catfishing. Know that I truly appreciate every single one of you. Guys, that being said, this is going to conclude the first episode of the Cursed Bank Catfishing Podcast. Appreciate you stopping by.